Hi, and welcome back to my channel, where I'm going to cover the Cleric's Trickery Domain, a class specialization from the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook module. Clerics are one of the core classes within Dungeons & Dragons, and have been there for all of the editions that Wizards of the Coast has published. With 5th edition, there are now a number of class specializations you can choose from, and in this video we will be going over the Trickery Domain. However, clerics work a little differently than other classes when it comes to their class specialization, as they don't gain as many base features as other classes, but they do gain more features and abilities through their class specialization than what other classes get. Additionally, many of the features gained by the domain will typically complement or increase the effectiveness of many of the base class features. For instance, all clerics gain multiple domain-specific spells that do not need to be clerical in nature. However, they will function as a clerical spell while it is being cast. It is also the domain itself that fleshes out the channel Divinity feature and adds capabilities to it to complement the underlying premise of the domain itself. And as I've said before, I'm only going to focus on the levels where something has been gained and is specific to the Trickery Domain, as the bulk of the changes your cleric will receive that are not domain-specific have already been covered in the base class videos for the cleric. If you have not yet watched those videos, I will be sure to provide a link in the description below for you to gain quick access to them. With that in mind, let's take a look at the domain itself. Clerics gain their class specialization, or domain, at level 1, and this is due to the way that clerics gain access to their spells. When earlier editions were published, the concept was that clerics would call upon their gods to cast their spells. The gods would then use the cleric's body and soul to channel that spell into its inevitable conclusion, and it was the cleric's prayer, or the act of casting that spell, that allowed that connection to happen. As I've stated before, with 5th edition, the gods are less involved, but still grant their worshipping clerics the means to cast spells on their behalf. Instead of the cleric themselves being the focal point of the spell, they now use foci, much like other spellcasters of this edition, and it's the foci that acts as the origin point for the spell. And all of this ties directly into the god you have chosen for your cleric to worship with respect to the domain. How you choose a god for your character to worship is up to you. But in 5th edition, the domain is used as a guidepost through the suggested domains column in each of the tables that list the various gods for various worlds. It doesn't mean you can't select a god whose suggested domain is different than the one you have chosen. But as I have indicated in the base class videos, if you select a god that has no relationship to the domain that you have chosen, then there could be, at least from a role-playing point of view, issues casting some spells. The god you have chosen might simply refuse to grant the spell unless it in some way aligns with some other worldly goal they have in mind, for instance. With respect to the clerics of the Trickery Domain, they are more apt to avoid combat as much as they possibly can, and that's only if it's avoidable. They will use stealth, subterfuge, and other forms of sneakiness and trickery to achieve their goals, or the goals of their gods. Because of this, they operate similar to the way that thieves would with respect to constantly sneaking around or attempting to con or trick their counterparts. Primarily those who are quite wealthy, being tyrannical, or otherwise just need a dressing down. However, they generally use these capabilities for the betterment of their peers, freeing those from tyranny or who have otherwise been enslaved or captured by some means, and they do this using subtle methods, but in very effective ways. And in order for me to continue with the rest of this video, and because the clerics select their domain at level 1, I've gone ahead and entered in all of my ability scores as well as chosen my race as well as my character's subrace, in order to be able to get you to the screen as quickly as possible. And what you will see here is that when I select the cleric class, our skill proficiencies as well as their class specialization come up as selectable options. In this case, I'm just going to randomly choose those two, but for here, I'm going to go ahead and choose the Trickery Domain. And that will prepare us for being able to complete the rest of this video. So I'm going to go ahead and finish off the rest of this character, and then bring you back once we're ready to look at the first set of features. At level 1, your character is going to gain access to 2 features, one called Trickery Domain Spells, and another called Blessing of the Trickster. But first, we're going to cover the domain-specific spells that your character is going to gain as part of this domain. At level 1, your character is going to gain access to the Charm Person and Disguise Self spells, adding to those that you would usually choose during character creation. These spells, however, are meant to complement the spells that you can select during character creation and while your character levels up at future levels. Because of this, they do not count against the total number of spells that your character can prepare, and they themselves are always considered prepared. This means that you can choose to use any of these spells as long as your character has the correct level and has an available spell slot that they can then use. So in this case, our character has 2 level 1 spell slots, for example. I highly recommend that you look at creating a new spell group associated with your domain-specific spells, and that will separate those spells that you have to prepare from those that you don't have to prepare because they're already considered prepared. Setting up a custom spell group is reasonably easy. All you have to do is drag and drop one of those spells into place, and then modify this field while you have the group display option enabled. What I'm going to do is call this Trickery Domain Spells. And as soon as I hit the tab key to exit that particular field, you'll see that there is now a new group here. Unfortunately, this isn't a spell group, it is a power group, so that's going to be our next change. We can modify it by clicking on this magnifying glass here that is part of our group category. And what we want to do is modify the group type. So in this case, it is currently set to abilities. When I click it once with the left mouse button, it's going to change it to spells, and the bottom down here is going to be modified. While I'm here, I'm going to want to go ahead and link everything to our Wisdom ability score as well, because all of the spells that are going to be coming through this particular feature are not necessarily from the Cleric class, and we can leave the rest as it is currently configured. In this case, we now have our new group. What I'm now going to do is drag Disguise Self into that group, and you can see that it will automatically link itself to this particular spell group. You will also notice that there is an icon here. That is an indication to you that it is prepared, whereas here we don't have that indication. That's because these spells you have to prepare manually. When it comes to using spells, it's going to function based on the number of spell casting slots that you have available to you. I'm going to go ahead and switch us into combat and actions for a moment, and you can see here that we have 2 first level spell slots. That means that I can cast any of the first level spell slots that I have prepared, or any of our Trickery Domain based spells. And you can see that the level 1 spells that we selected during character creation, they aren't there. That's because we haven't prepared them, and I've done that intentionally. Whenever you're going through a combat-based situation or making use of a spell during an encounter, this is the format that you're going to want your actions tab to be in. So I'm going to go ahead and pop open the character wizard here. Sorry, the combat tracker. I've already got the Archmage targeted here, and I'm going to try to cast Charm Person on them. I'm going to minimize that so that I gain access to the spells. I'm going to roll, and the Archmage has advantage against charm effects, which means that it can roll 2 dice in this particular case. Unfortunately for us, the Archmage succeeded, but let's say, for instance, that they failed. If they fail, what I would do is left-click this to apply the charmed effect, if you will, on that particular target. With respect to Disguise Self, there is no effect here. You're going to be making use of the features that are defined within the spell itself, and this is going to be more of a role-playing based casting. However, you're still going to want to click this to indicate that you used it during a particular combat situation or preparation for an encounter or whatever. In either case, whenever you make use of a spell, you're going to want to make sure that you actually select the spell slot that you used in order to cast that. And the reason why is because Fantasy Grounds is not able to detect if you're casting a spell at a higher level. For example, a healing spell can be cast at higher levels depending on the spell that you're casting. When you do that, you get to add additional dice to that particular spell. In the case of, say, Cure Wounds, that would be an additional 1d8 for every level that you have chosen from a spell slot point of view. And as a result of that, you're going to have to tell Fantasy Grounds what level you cast a spell at. Also, at Cleric level 1, your character is going to gain access to the Blessing of the Trickster feature. And this feature allows your character to grant a blessing on a given willing creature to give them advantage on stealth checks for approximately 1 hour. This will require your character to use an action to do so, meaning it will replace your character's normal action capabilities during combat encounters. But it does not mean that it can't be used outside of combat. Both you and the DM would simply assume that your character is taking a moment to apply the benefits to a given creature. There is a catch, however. This creature cannot be your own character and must be willing to accept the blessing. If they do, and your character applies the blessing, then for a period of 1 hour, that creature can gain advantage on all stealth checks that they make by rolling 2 dice. And it's going to cancel out any disadvantage rolls that would normally apply, for example, heavy armor that has a disadvantage to stealth checks. However, if you choose to grant another creature this blessing while you have a blessing already active, then the first blessing is going to end by removing the advantage from that creature and then applying it to the second one. And other than the requirement to use this during an action of some kind, there isn't any other restriction on it, meaning that you don't have to use it and then wait for a rest period before you regain the use of it. you have the ability to use it right away. And how this works is reasonably simple. Let's say that this ancient brass dragon has agreed to accept your blessing. You literally just drag and drop the effect directly onto them, or you can choose to untarget any hostile creature that you have and simply go ahead and left click once in order to apply the effect. Doesn't really matter how you do it, can be done either way. But now they're going to gain advantage when it comes to skill checks. So whenever they roll something that is specific to the stealth skill, they will be able to roll 2 dice as opposed to just 1. Now, if someone else is causing that particular dragon to have disadvantage, then the advantage and the disadvantage are going to cancel each other out, thus allowing the dragon to roll as they normally would for a stealth check. Unless that dragon normally gets advantage whenever they roll a stealth check. If that's the case, then their own advantage would just be merged with the advantage you just gave them, and then that would cancel out the disadvantage that is being applied to them. So again, they would just simply roll 1 dice. And the good news for that dragon is that that's going to last for an hour, unless you choose to move it to, say, the green dragon here, who happens to also be temporarily an ally of our character. At Cleric level 2, your character is going to gain the Channel Divinity feature through the base class, which is found right here. But it is also going to gain another feature called Invoke Duplicity. These are both going to be linked to the usage requirements for the Channel Divinity feature, meaning that they share the usage limitations of Channel Divinity itself. Essentially, it's going to complement the Turn Undead that you're being granted through this Channel Divinity feature here, with another option that you can choose to use. As a result of this, we'll want to set these up in a very specific way. If we take a look at our character's Actions tab, we'll see that we have this Turn Undead feature here, but we don't have Channel or the Invoke Duplicity. And that's primarily because the Invoke Duplicity is kind of a role-playing based feature. What we can do, however, is configure this so that we can track the usage of this particular option with respect to Channel Divinity. To do that, I'm going to create a new group called Channel Divinity. And as soon as I do that, it's going to move the Turn Undead into that group. I'm then going to modify this group here, set it up so that it uses Wisdom as our stat, and then I'm going to set it up to do 1 rest, because that is the limitation that we need with respect to clerics. I'm then going to drag and drop this onto our character's action sheet here, and it's going to throw it up into a group called Powers. All I want to do is copy and paste this group down there, and now we have both of these options linked to this particular group. And I'm going to get rid of the duplication of Channel Divinity there. The reason we want to do that is, let's say that you need to invoke Duplicity here. When you do that, you're going to tick this off, and you will notice right away that Turn Undead is no longer available to us. That's because we only have 1 use when it comes to every feature that is dropped into this particular group. At level 6, when you gain the ability to have 2 uses of Channel Divinity, then there'll be 2 pips here. And when you tick 1 off, only 1 of them will be tagged as used, and you will still have the other available to you. With the Invoke Duplicity feature itself, it is used to create a perfect illusion of your character, placing them within 30 feet of where your character currently stands, and will last for about 1 minute or until your character's concentration is broken. It uses an action to create the illusion, but while that duplicate exists, you can control its movement by using a bonus action, allowing you to make that movement of 30 feet at a time, as long as that particular duplicate remains within 120 feet of your character. However, while it is active, you can use the duplicate as a focal point of spells, but there are a few limitations. And while those limitations are restricted to things like hearing, seeing, smelling, and touch, there is something that you should consider. If it is a touch-based spell, both your character and its duplicate must be within 5 feet of that particular target. The reason being is that while your character has to complete the touch, it's going to appear as though it's coming from the duplicate. The duplicate is essentially going to mimic your movements, but because the way that the spell works is based off of your character's own senses, your character is the one that physically has to touch that target. Any spell that is range-based isn't going to suffer that kind of limitation, but when it comes to the senses again, it's your character that has to be able to see or hear that target if that's going to be a requirement of the spell, or even smell the target if for some reason there's a spell out there that allows you to work off of that kind of sense. The idea is that it's your character's senses that are used for sight, hearing, smell, and touch, but you can use the illusion, if you will, of your duplicate as the origin point for those spells. As an example of what that's going to look like, let's say that skeletons 11 and 8 are visible to your character, but the vampire is not. And let's say that we're going to attempt to cast Bane on all 3 of those particular targets. Your duplicate, however, is able to see all 3 targets. Unfortunately, because your own character can't, only skeleton 11 and skeleton 8 could be affected by whatever spell you're going to cast if it's range-based. So in that particular case, you would, although I know that they're dead in this particular example, I'm going to target them and untarget Brass Dragon. I can then cast my Bane spell on them, although I think they're kind of immune to it. Might be. Nope, they failed. And then I would be able to apply the effects to those particular targets. The vampire was the other one that you were trying to add this to, but because your own character couldn't visually see it, but the duplicate could, you couldn't add that to the target group in order to be able to have the effects come into play. Now that is specific to the visual sense. When it comes to the hearing sense, if you are personally out of range from being able to hear the targets that you're aiming for, but your duplicate is, if the spell that you're attempting to cast requires those particular targets to be able to hear you, then what will happen there is the spell's simply going to fail because you are personally, your character is personally outside of their hearing range, even though your duplicate is within their hearing range. Another aspect of this feature is that your character gains advantage on attack rolls when both your character and their duplicate are within 5 feet of a target that you happen to be attacking. This can be highly useful, and you'll effectively be flanking that target, hence why you're gaining the advantage, because the target would not know who the real character is versus the duplicate, as both would appear like they're attacking that particular character or target in this specific kind of situation. Unfortunately, that does mean that advantage can only be gained on melee-based attacks, or spells that require touch and make use of an attack roll, although I don't think there are that many, if there are any, to be honest. At Cleric level 3, your character is going to gain access to their next domain-based spells, which in this case is going to be Mirror Image and Pass Without a Trace. Because we've already gone ahead and set up a power group, or spell group rather, for our Trickery Domain spells, I'm just going to minimize everything else here just so that we can focus on that. There we go. All we have to do is literally drag and drop those spells into the same group that we have already set up. And the reason why is it's going to create something called a linked group. And then I'm just going to drag and drop that into there. What I mean by a linked group is as follows. If I change this ability score from Wisdom to Charisma, close this, and then modify or look at each of these particular panels, you'll see that it is set up as Charisma. If I go back to our normal spell group, you'll see that it is still configured for Wisdom. The reason being is that this particular feature here allows you to actually link those two groups together in a way that is separate from other spell groups. That way, if you have slightly different requirements here, then you don't have to worry about unintentionally changing something that might affect these particular groups, and all of those changes will only affect those things that are associated with these particular groups. It's nice, it's convenient, and it allows you to very quickly organize these things. Something that I just caught on to, and it's unfortunately taken me 6 Cleric videos to actually make this realization. The reason why these are tagged as prepared, and these are not, let me expand these out, is because there is a number here for this group, but there isn't one defined here. That is the reason why these spells are always showing up as prepared. And that is actually legitimately perfect for what we need, because these are spells that are classified as always prepared. I just can't believe it's taken me that long to make that realization. At Cleric level 5, your character is going to gain access to their next set of domain spells, and in this case it's going to be Blink and Dispel Magic. Just like before, all we have to do is go to our Actions tab here and drag and drop them into the existing spell group that we have already created for our domain spells. And you can see that it is automatically created our level 3 Trickery Domain spells group, and there's nothing else we really have to do. So let's go ahead and move on to the next feature. At Cleric level 6, your character is going to gain another Channel Divinity feature option called Cloak of Shadows, and it grants your character the means to turn invisible during combat. When invoked as an action, your character will immediately become invisible, and will remain invisible until the end of their next turn, or unless they attack or cast a spell. Effectively, what this means is that your character can turn themselves invisible for the remainder of the round where they made use of this particular feature. And regardless of whether they start with an attack or cast a spell, at some point they're going to become visible during the next round anyway. So it makes sense to use the advantage you're gaining because of the invisibility to be able to make an attack or cast a spell, because it's simply going to drop regardless. It allows your character to more easily move about the field of battle and be able to pop up where no one's really expecting you to show up. And even if your character chose to end their next turn without executing any form of action, they're still going to become visible. So it makes sense to take advantage of it and do something while the invisibility is there. If you've used the character wizard to complete the leveling up process, then it's going to automatically add this feature to your character sheet. I'm going to go ahead and change the group here so that we can link it into our channel Divinity feature, because it's going to be linked to this. Now, by this level, you're going to now have the ability to use this twice before you run out of uses. And the invisibility effect is already there, so we don't have to worry about setting that up in this particular case. So we're done, and there's really not much more that we have to do. At Cleric level 7, they're gaining their next set of domain-specific spells. In this particular case, it is Dimension Door and Polymorph. So all we really need to do is take the opportunity to ensure that they are part of our character's action sheet, because they aren't automatically added for us. But other than that, they are now in place and ready for us to use. At Cleric level 8, your character is going to gain access to the Divine Strike feature. And what this feature gives you is the ability to make a melee or range-based attack with a weapon and add extra damage to it, in this case 1d8 points of poison damage. The good news for us is that this is automatically going to be set up for us. You can see that it's here already, and that we already have the 1d8 points of damage. How this works is reasonably simple. What you would do is you would target a particular creature, and then when you make an attack roll with a weapon, I had advantage on all of those because they're already dead. That's the reason why so many got rolled, but I really didn't want to roll against 2. So technically I should have only rolled 1, but anyway. Both of those have hit, regardless. So before I roll this damage, what I want to do is ensure that I add this to my own character, and you can see here that it's going to pop up. Now when I roll the damage, we're going to have the damage that we ourselves do, and then we're going to have additional damage that is going to come into play with respect to this. Now, again, there was double damage in play here, simply because of the fact that they're already dead. So it's an automatic crit because of that. That's not normally how it works for a creature that is not yet dying. There is a minor change we do need to make to this, in fact. Unfortunately, it's not configured to automatically go away on the next roll, which is what we need. So for some reason, it's not being created with that capability. So I'm going to go ahead, clear this effect out of the way. I've resurrected our creatures, although it's kind of hard to do that with an undead creature, but whatever. I'm going to make my attack roll. That is a miss. Make another attack roll next turn. That is a hit. Before I roll my damage, I apply the effect, roll the damage, and now we can see we have a proper amount of damage being applied here, and that the effect has gone away. At Cleric level 9, our character is gaining access to the last of their domain spells. So we're going to go ahead and just quickly pop these into place down here at the bottom. Going to expand that out. Going to make sure I drop both of these into place. So I've got Dominate Person and Modify Memory, as those are our 2 spells that we are gaining. And that completes everything that we have to do when it comes to the Trickery Domain. It also completes the last of the linked groups that we have to worry about. When it comes to Cleric level 14, we are simply gaining an improvement with respect to Divine Strike, in that it's going to do 2d8 points of damage as opposed to 1. We are going to have to modify this. This is not something that automatically gets changed for us, and you can see that right here. All we have to do is modify that particular feature, change the 1 to a 2, and that is the change that we have to deal with. If we take a look at our attack that we made on our skeleton earlier, let's make another attack roll here. That is going to be a miss. Next turn, critical hit. I really don't want to roll a critical hit demonstration here, but whatever. Again, we simply apply the effect, then we roll damage, and you should see doubling of every die that we have here because of the critical nature of that particular attack. And that automatically took out our skeleton. And finally, at Cleric level 17, your character is going to gain the improved Duplicity feature that gives your character 4 duplicates rather than a single duplicate when using the Invoke Duplicity Channel Divinity feature. Additionally, when you decide to move a duplicate, you can now move all 4 of those particular duplicates at the same time using the exact same bonus action. That doesn't mean that they all have to move in the same direction. You can choose which direction that they go, and you can move them independent of one another. It's all handled during your bonus action. However, they still have to remain within the 120-foot radius of where your character is standing. How many you choose to actually move is entirely up to you, and it's not going to impact any of the capabilities that you can do during the rest of that particular round. But once you've declared you're using your bonus action to move them and choose to move only 2, you cannot decide later on to move the other 2 later on in that particular turn or before you end your turn. You will have to wait until your turn circles around again. All of the other restrictions still come into play, so if you're looking to cast a touch-based spell on a target, then one of those duplicates, including your own character, has to be within 5 feet of that particular target. If you're choosing to use a ranged base attack, then you can choose which duplicate that effect appears to come out of. Unfortunately, because I didn't demonstrate how that looks on a map, literally what you do is you create 3 or 4 copies of your character on the map, and then you move those independently using your ability to move them around if the Dungeon Master allows that to happen. And the reason why I didn't demonstrate that is because it's going to be entirely up to you and the Dungeon Master as to how you use that feature with respect to displaying it on a map. However, there's nothing else we have to do with respect to improved duplicity. It doesn't change the number of features that we have listed within our Channel Divinity group here, because it's not adding a new feature to Channel Divinity itself. It's simply improving the ability to use this one. A cleric of this domain is the perfect character to have along when having to deal with large groups of creatures, or in a situation where stealth is the primary means of moving about. And that's because of the illusionary capabilities and because of the wide range of various spells that they can cast. It is far easier for a cleric of this domain to help move an entire group through areas as quietly as possible, or at the worst, deal with any creatures that have stumbled upon the party and still manage to keep things quiet. However, this does bring us to the end of this video. I hope you found it useful and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I want to thank you for watching this video, and if you found the information useful, click on that like button as well as leave a comment below, as it helps the channel gain exposure. Also, consider subscribing, as I release content similar to this topic quite regularly on the channel.